calories and vitamins and micronutrients, and that you could serve it all up in a big kind of pile of slop and say, there you go, that's your meal. It meets 2,000 calories, vitamin C.
It's climate friendly.
It's climate friendly.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel today. As I was going through my video archive earlier this morning and just looking at what I could bring you today that might bring you a lot of value and understanding around some of the events going on in the world, I actually realized that I had a video prepared and I'd even broken down this video, and then somehow, I think there must have been a big event that happened at the time in the news, I didn't publish the video and I forgot all about it. So today I'm going to bring this video to you, which is fascinating to say the least. In fact, it's probably a good thing I didn't post it at the end of 2022, because now in the middle of 2023 it's even more relevant, and it reads like a, fortune tellers talking about what they are going to do as we go into this year and beyond. It's staggering actually, but rather than me talk quite heavily throughout the video, I'm going to play clips so that you can see this for yourself. So buckle your seatbelts and let's get into the first clip.
Now, the crisis we're seeing right now is clearly showing that all of these things that we do to ensure the resilience of the food system needs to accelerate even further.
Okay, so that was another key point then. What she said there was that what's being done right now in the food system needs to accelerate even further, or even faster, I think is another word here. So what we are seeing and what we have been seeing maybe is just the tip of the iceberg, maybe that there is a lot more to come. And later on in the video, they actually talk about this as well, and they talk about developing nations and some of the stuff you'll notice that one of the men even laughs about it, and it's very strange.
The first global energy crisis, and by that I mean almost every part of the world affected. We're relatively insulated in the United States, but that's not the exception, not the norm. And almost every fuel. But what's happening in Europe is having ripple effects by pushing up energy prices in the developing world and emerging markets. Pakistan, Bangladesh, which are having trouble affording natural gas, affording coal, everything is going kind of through the roof in terms of prices. And because those prices are so high, natural gas, as you said, used for cooking, used for heating, and for fertilizer. That's how we make, that's how we grow food. And I think somewhere around 70% of the fertilizer production in Europe is shut down right now, because we don't have enough energy. It's too expensive. And when you're facing scarce molecules, scarce energy sources, what do politicians do? First thing you got to do is let people keep heating their homes. You got to keep the electricity going. So there's a plan in Europe now to gradually ration energy as needed.
Again, that is somewhat of a bombshell in terms of the rationing plan, because we saw the initial blips of that. It didn't actually come full force through the economy. But the politicians definitely have made these plans now, and they exist for the winter of 2023 going into 2024. So I bet you didn't know that. That hasn't been on the BBC or any of the European networks. But it's just interesting how they talk about the fertilizer production, talked about 70%, and how it seems as though everyone knew in the first place that by doing all the energy sanctions that it would cut off all of the energy. But here's the thing that they're not saying as well, which is a very selfish thing. So they knew that by doing all the sanctions that they wouldn't be able to produce fertilizer in Europe. So the majority of it was just completely cut off. They couldn't import it. So what did they do instead? And again, you won't see this on the news anywhere. The developed countries did new deals to buy the food from developing nations. So even though it looks like, the West is such a goody-goody and, we're helping in the world and everything else, actually you could say, and I know this is a strong statement, you could say that we're doing that on the one hand, but then on the other hand, we're stealing the food from the people who need it the most. And we know that's happening, because how can you get 200 or 300% food inflation in certain developing economies? And you can see the malnourishment rate is through the roof. You see the poverty and the famine in developing nations through the roof. And we won't even get into the death rate in terms of the people starving. I mean, it's quite shocking, really.
thing you shut down is your industry. And fertilizer is a big part of industry, ammonia, and that's going to have a big impact in some of the poorer parts of the world in terms of food production.
May I just jump in? Just to quantify this, let's also maybe put a number to that. If you produce without fertilizers, you lose 50% of the yields. That is the delta between agriculture with fertilizer and agriculture without.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And actually, we did that study as well. We've done that on a video here previously, especially when we looked at Sri Lanka, which was the test case for the WEF. We knew it was not going to work. It was pretty obvious. And then Sri Lanka fell, and we saw those scenes of the people rushing the palace and everything else. It seems like a long time ago now, but that is the evidence right there. You remove the fertilizer and you remove a huge amount of the yield. So they know this, they knew this going forward. And now you see this food crisis, although we're not really seeing it in the West as much. What we are seeing is increased prices. We know they've doubled over the last year, if not a little bit more. The statistics they put out, the 20% increase in prices, is just not accurate. You know, I know, we see it in our grocery bill and our shopping trolley or shopping cart. So we know it's not accurate. So what's happening is when you have a limited food supply and it gets smaller and smaller, you've still got the same amount of people, haven't you? So the prices on that food goes up, and that means that in the West we're able to still buy it, but we have to pay more for that food. Whereas those developing nations that we talked about, there comes a point where people just get priced out, so they can't afford the cost of that food anymore.
That is really the scale that we're looking at, is not just that there is a shortfall now, is that actually if you look forward just a year or 2 years, it's not going to be an access issue, it's going to be an availability issue.
I'm sorry, but it will be next year.
Next year, yeah.
Okay, did you hear what he just said there? He said next year, and they all laughed about that.
Africa uses 3% of the global fertilizer, so it's very low, the intensity of use. The potential of growth is enormous. Right. That's why the Dangote plant was built, which could supply fertilizers to all Africa. The problem is that...
Yeah, we know what the problem is with the plant. That's in Nigeria. And if you're not aware of this, it's worth looking this up. So they built this plant in Nigeria to provide fertilizer, which was supposed to go throughout Africa and help African nations to grow more food because they've got the sun and the availability to do it. But what do you think happened to all that fertilizer? The majority of it, it's something ridiculous. It's in the 90 percentile region of that fertilizer doesn't stay in Africa. It actually leaves and goes elsewhere.
95.5% of the fertilizer in Dangote plant goes to South America. So why? Why doesn't it stay in Africa, for which it was built with money of IFC? So it was in certain way de-risked by
So this
the
is a factory, for people listening,
in Nigeria. It's a factory of fertilizers in Nigeria. But most of it goes to South America because it's more profitable for them. They're a company, they're doing the correct thing. The problem is what is happening that this thing is not moving inside Africa. No? But you're completely right. What is happening right now with natural gas is closing 10 of the plants of fertilizers in Europe, and Europe was an exporter of nitrogen. Nitrogen is the element that wipes the fastest, no, when you produce. And therefore, that will create, Europe will become a net importer when it was an exporter. So that will put even a bigger shock over the supply.
And that's going to squeeze some of the lower income parts of the world, as we're seeing with energy.
It will affect the poorest, no?
Yeah. Who already are facing an economic crisis because they can't afford energy, among other things.
You see how that guy, I mean, I don't know if that was a nervous laugh or what, but he's laughing there about the poorest people can't afford energy and other things. Well, no, not when people like these people here plan this well in advance, where they are deliberately doing this because they genuinely believe, and I mean this seriously, they genuinely believe we've only got 2.5 years left. So 2026. They genuinely believe that if we don't get all of this CO2 and everything down by 2026, that is it. There's nothing more we can do after that point. 1.5 degree increase and everything else like that. They genuinely believe this. And as you know from my videos and research into this, I don't believe that. I don't believe that, you know, within 2.5 years, the world, you know, you're not going to be able to reverse all this climate and all this stuff. I've been hearing this since I was a kid. I've been hearing you know, gosh, way back when, every couple of years there would be, you know, this new report saying we've got 4 years left, we've got 5 years left before it's irreversible. And then Al Gore came out with his, that was the most recent one, that we had, what was it, 8 years before it was irreversible. And then Obama came out with another one. We had 7 or 8 years before it was irreversible. So now, you know, call me a skeptic, but I've heard this for decades now, over and over again. And this time around, I see it as even worse, because now the people who are in control of all the climate money and the carbon credits are the same people that are linking everything to the CBDC and the social credit system, and how this is all going to be controlled. And I just don't see it the way a lot of, I don't know if my viewers see it the same way or not, but you know, I just don't see it the way the majority of people around the West in particular see it. Because the mainstream media has done a fantastic job of just putting this information out non-stop that, you know, we've got a couple of years left, or that's it, it's irreversible.
We're now entering an age of incredible volatility, and we just do not have a system that's set up to manage and deal with the risk that is going to come from this volatility. Ukraine, yes, it was a black swan event by our current standards. That is the norm. There will be increasing amount of conflict. Pakistan, what we saw there, will just be that will be happening every year.
That's again another very interesting observation there. Did you hear what he said? He said Ukraine will be the norm. We're going to have an increasing amount of conflict as we go forward in time. And again, remember, these people are fortune tellers. They seem to know exactly what's going to come next.
And year over year over year, we will know. In a few years, we would no longer call that a black swan event.
This is the flooding that we've seen, and also
flooding,
the extreme heat.
You know, America is on fire. You know, other places haven't had rain in 20, 30 years. Like, this is now becoming what we have to design our system for, and which to this point we have done not at all.
Interesting. So even more fascinating, just building on those comments. So he said within a few years. So remember, that was the end of 2022 recorded. So we could say not quite 2030, but maybe 2027 sort of region. He's saying that this is going to be a regular occurrence, this sort of conflict. The black swan events that we saw will be a regular occurrence. And now he's just getting into climatic things here, and flooding and heat and everything else.
I think Food and Ag, honestly, is our only chance, quite frankly, to sequester enough carbon to give us enough time for other technologies to come to bear to give to mitigate the worst of climate. A lot of the carbon that is in our air used to be in our soil.
We have seen, given the civil unrest has happened in many countries, when food fails, everything fails.
Calories and vitamins and micronutrients, and that you could serve it all up in a big kind of pile of slop and say, there you go, that's your meal. It meets 2,000 calories, vitamin C.
It's climate friendly.
It's climate friendly.
So that's up to us. That's up to policymakers, investors, business, and industry to make it much easier on people. And then I think we have to do the hard work over time to shift the cultural values to include better nutrition and climate sustainability in what we expect from our food system from a consumer standpoint. So that's why you have to sort of shift those values over time to include a different way of thinking, and then we express it.
Yeah, where have we heard that? This is very interesting now. Remember, we heard Larry Fink of BlackRock talking about this, forcing change, forcing the psychology of how we think, changing all of this. And they talk about diversity a lot, bringing in more culture and more diversity from elsewhere in order to sort of remove that cultural identity, and then to bring in policy that forces changes of behavior. So again, they're talking about this here. I've heard this so many times from the WEF and some other organizations that I think it's no longer just a theory. I think it's pretty concrete that they are doing this in order to change the way that we think. And unfortunately, it tends to be the people who don't take a lot of time to think, who are just influenced by this so easily that it sort of falls into their subconscious, I guess, and then they sort of embody this as their own belief system.
Yeah, well, it was your introduction to me, which said I run an energy institute at Columbia, but also the Columbia Climate School. It's the first climate school in the country. There are a lot of institutes, there are a lot of centers. University like Columbia has a couple of schools, a law school, a business school, a medical school. We've decided to create the first climate school because it's the largest commitment an institution like that can make to this issue. We just graduated our first class of 90 master's students with a degree in climate and society, and I will say to stand on that campus overlooking 30,000 people bestowing degrees on those extraordinary young people who are...
Yeah, but again, what has this... So they've created this climate school where the backing is going to be very interesting and who's been funding all of this. So they now have 90 people going out there with a master's, putting out one side of all of this into public thinking when what they've been taught may not be correct in the first place. So you see how this is sort of going through the economy now. So is it any wonder that we keep seeing articles week after week about destroying the livestock all around the world? And now we keep having all these articles and videos and news reports on lab-grown meat and how that is the future. It's lab-grown meat, it's insects protein, and that meat in general is just not going to be permissible under the new climate and the carbon credit system.
The window we have is very small because the financial crisis that is coming will be very bad.
Oh, I must have missed that little clip the first time I watched the video actually, because I did not know that he said that the financial crisis that is coming is going to be really bad. So that's an interesting clip.
If we don't take opportunity of this little window, I think we lose a very important chance to the transformation that we need.
All right, well, there you go. There's a very small window, there's 2.5 years left to create the transformation that we need to completely save the planet. But I can guarantee you one thing, and I would probably bet everything I own on this bet for anyone that wants to take it. In 2.5 years' time, I will be sat here talking about this all over again and how it's another 5 years, or maybe it's another 2 years or another 3 years, and that is the window of opportunity. We've only got 2 or 3 more years left, and then it's irreversible. It's going to be the exact same story all over again in 2.5 years when this period they're talking about now lapses. And this is probably going to coincide with something that's going to be too late by that point. And that is the CBDC, central bank digital currency, the 15-minute cities, the carbon credit score, the social credit score, and all these other things. Once we're in that system, it's pretty much too late. There will be no reversing all of this stuff. So as always, my advice is the same. If you don't want to be part of that system, make sure that you take precautions and preparations now, because if you wait another year, 2 years or whatever, then I think it's just going to be too late to get out of that system, which we know is coming. It's not a conspiracy theory or anything like that. We know it's coming. It is a fact. You can see it for yourself. It is everywhere now. So thank you so much for watching today. Take care. God bless you guys. And I will see you tomorrow for the weekly walk and talk.